Hi, welcome to the session. Today we're going to be looking at the Stranger Things theme song and how do we create that using only Logic Pro instruments. Logic Pro's wealth of built-in sounds and synths is perfect for recreating Stranger Things, so let's have a look. So this is the project for Stranger Things theme song. It's at 84 BPM and let's have a listen. All right, let's break it down. Now, the first bit is just two synths together. And the first one is a dark pad that you can find on ES2. You go to Synth Pads, Dark Pad. And most of these pads and synths I'm using are tweaked a little bit from presets. So just have a look at the project and play around with them. Now, this dark pad is pretty straightforward. It's playing these notes. Here's how it sounds. Now, if you open up the dark pad, you can actually see that there is some, let me open up the events list. You can see some modulation. Yeah. And basically it's just the mod wheel being turned. And yeah, pretty straightforward. Most of these standard instruments, when you turn up the mod wheel, is usually a cutoff kind of control. So that's what I did, and it's pretty straightforward. Just turn up the mod wheel. And there you go. Pretty straightforward. Now let's look at the ARP thing that's happening, right? I use an alchemy patch under arpeggiated 1970s analog ARP. I moved it slightly from pulse to octave, and yeah, the ARP is already built in initially. You can use different synth sounds as well, play around with them, and if they don't have an ARP, you can just use the MIDI plugin called Arpeggiator. But since Alchemy already has an ARP built in, I'm using the built-in ARP. So here's how it sounds, how it looks. So it's actually just these notes, right? And it's just a ascending, descending pattern. And I sent it to a bus with a space design because it's got this really spacious feel. So I sent it to a bus, large space halls, bright hall, because it captures all that bright tail. And I was quite generous with it, 2.6 minus 3. Just sent it to a bus right there. So that's how it sounds together. And the swell really rises right at the end. So that's how you get the intro. Now the main section has this ARP going on, and it's sort of like going out throughout the entire song. So it's just this pattern, and you can loop it by hovering your mouse. You can see the loop, the cursor turn into a loop there, and just drag it like this. Yeah. And drag it as long as you want. So this one is a combination of many different synths layered on top of each other, and I always layer my synths because that's how you get more complex sounds, more textures. So this one I pick a synth lead percussive pulse, and basically it's playing this pattern right here. And it's just repeating. So this one sounds like this. And you can hear it get louder as time goes by because this one has an automation. Hang on. Yep. Volume automation that sort of brings it in. So you have different layers with different sounds, and you have different automations sort of like blending them together at different points. That's how you get different sort of like changes in textures as well. That's one way to do it. And so this one plays the same thing, but you can see that it's a slightly different sound. This one is not the same ES2 track, I think. Oh no, it is the same ES2 track, but it's got an EQ on it. So here's how it sounds. It's a much thinner sound because of the high pass EQ. This EQ the hell out of the low end. And versus this one's really dry. This one's got some reverb to it. So you blend these two together, you get a different texture. You can hear it becoming more sort of distorted as well. And then you have another third one, and this one is a retro synth. So it's just a default one, and it sounds kind of like, yeah. Most of the time when I'm creating sounds, I actually use presets, but in this case, this one's a really simple synth with two waveforms, so I kind of mucked around to get the kind of sound that I want. And I think retro synth is one of the easiest ones to sort of like learn how synths work and how sort of subtractive synthesis works, and you can just play around with it and hear how these things sound. So this one sounds like this. And there's automation as well. Volume automation. And when you hear all of them together, you get a little like evolution of sound. So it gets brighter and more distorted as the sort of song progresses, and you can see that there's a drop there. And becomes really soft here. There's a different section of the song. So what you need to do a lot, I think, is automate not just volumes and blends, but you can automate different things as well. Like on this track, we have a LPF cutoff, low pass filter cutoff automation, and you can see that it's sort of like opening up as time goes by. So that's how we work with the main sort of arpeggiated theme. And on the other side, we have just very simple basic kick. It goes like that. So I picked an EXS24 kick that you can find under drums and percussion, single drums kicks, layer kicks. And there's tons of kicks and, electronic kicks, layer kicks, acoustic kicks, and just play around until you find something you like. This one was too bright, so I sort of EQ'd a lot of the top end off. So you get this sort of dull sound because it's quite, sort of like just happening in the background. Now, we have a really deep trip hop remix, sort of like sub bass kind of thing going on. It's under drums and percussion, electronic drum kits, and trip hop remix. And I kind of just put it there because there's this really low bass when the song first sort of hits. Yeah, so it's kind of like that. And on top of that sort of arpeggiated thing, you have a pad going on. I kind of duplicated this pad onto the next pad, and you can duplicate it with this button, new track with duplicate settings. But I changed the EQ, you know, mucked around with, took off the high end because it needed to be really dark, and it sounds like that. This is a super long decay, so you can sort of muck around with your ADSR. You know, I think you should download the project, play around with it, muck around with ADSRs, muck around with the blends and the different waveforms, and hear how it affects the sound. And that's kind of how I learned with synths as well, so I think that's a good way to go about it. And there's another pad here, and it's doing pretty much the same thing, but I think it's a bit brighter. There's no EQ on it. So if you have sounds that are similar, but you need different textures, sometimes it's best to just duplicate tracks and just muck around with the settings within that track so you get different kind of tracks. Sometimes it's just volume. Other times it's different settings for the instrument, and sometimes it's EQ. But one of the tricks that I recommend is just duplicating tracks and then just changing little bits for different sections. Now, the drums are really straightforward, as I mentioned before. This is not really a sort of drum-heavy song. It's more of like a pad and arpeggio kind of stuff. So we got this choir. You can find it in Alchemy under pads, vocal, warm, fake choir, and I sort of pushed it between resonant LPF and resonant 2. And sometimes you have to muck around with different, you know, just turn the knobs a little bit and hear how it sounds, turn the knob another way and hear how it sounds and see what sounds good. So in this case, it's sort of like a paddy type thing. And you can hear that it's super sort of bandwidth limited EQ, you know, it's like kind of boxy a little bit. And the EQ looks like this. You know, I took off a lot of low end, some high end, you know, and jacked up the mid range a little bit to make it sound quite boxy. And that's kind of like the kind of sound they have in the song. And then you have more sort of bass lines going on. And this one sounds like this. Sort of like a piano-y kind of thing. And I can't remember which one this was, but it's like a synth pluck. So it's in advance. I mucked around a little bit, and it wasn't by itself. It had a little sort of like bassy element paired with it. So as you can see, like I was saying, you always stack the different synths together, and this one sounds like that. And there's another layer. And they all sound pretty good by themselves, but when you layer them, you get something even more like interesting and complex. Right? And it just sounds richer and nicer, really. And you have stuff like this. These are little touches. Right, the little accents. This was a sculpture one because it's, for me, it sounded like sort of a sort of like a zither kind of sound. So I thought sculpture would be great for it. I looked around. I found a pluck instrument called La Méditerranée. Mess around with the sounds a little bit. Just turn sliders here and there and see what came out of it. And this is how I got that sound. Nice and bright. And more layers even. There's a soft sweep, and it's basically a synthesizer motion sequences in EXS24. You find soft sweep, and here's how it sounds. And you got little details like this air choir again, Alchemy, which is you know, like this big attacky kind of sound. So when you put it together, it sounds like this. And I think it sort of like gets the feel pretty well. And there's a duck swell here as well. It's just a small accents. And a lot of sort of when the big beat hits, the drop happens, you get these little accents and they sort of really bring out that feel about it, the attack feel about it. There are other pads as well. So you can see that the pads evolve into other pads like this one, which is an alchemy pad. And it's under ambient. You get an additive church organ. Moved it to muffled. A bit of a fluty kind of sound. You can see, have a look at this section here. And so there's an automation going on, right? Let me open up the automation. You can see it, transform pad X and transform pad Y. So what you could do is just turn this into touch, and as it's playing through, just drag this over here and pull it back. You might have to do it a few times to get the right timing and the right changes at the right time. You might have to do it a few times to get the changes at the right time. And then after you've done the touch, you can change it back to read, and basically it'll read that automation. So that's how it works. And you have even more stuff going on. Lovely voices under atmospheric pads. So there's a lot of pads in this, as you can see. Like, basically this thing is carrying sort of the rhythm, right? All the arpeggiated stuff is carrying the rhythm, and all the textures are happening in the background. So this one's like that. You can see there's automation, volume automation as well. Let me check if there's anything else. Just volume automation. That's it. And you know, you get all these coming in right at the end. And for Bright Cycle, I duplicated the track again because I wanted a different texture. I mucked around with it a little bit more. And there's a volume automation as well. So you get that kind of like... So, you know, stuff you can't do with just one single track. So, you know, that duplicating trick, I think kind of works. Yeah, and there's some of these pads, depending on the kind of textures, you need to send it to the bus. And I just use one single bus for this whole thing. Yeah, and that's how you put it together. I hope you learned something useful today, like how to layer different synths and use automation to create different textures. If you like, you can download the project at the link below and have a play around. If you like these videos, please subscribe for more. See ya.